Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Strait Science. Strait Science is an evening science seminar put on by UAF Northwest Campus here in Nome, and also UAF Alaska Sea Grant, also here in Nome. And we are both, Northwest Campus and Sea Grant, we are both public servants of the Bering Strait region. We will serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, Yupik, and St. Lawrence Island Yupik peoples. So tonight, one of the biggest, we were talking earlier about industrial maritime traffic in the strait, and everybody knows about it that lives out here. And one of the big kind of, nightmares is what's going to happen if something goes wrong with a big ship transiting through the Bering Strait region. And tonight we're going to learn a little bit more about how that will work and who is involved. And for tonight's speaker, we have Commander Mark Everett. He is retired after 30 years of uniformed service with the U.S. Coast Guard. Since 2012, he has served as the Incident Management and Preparedness Advisor to the 17th District Coast Guard in Juneau. And I'm going to read this up because it's pretty important and important to us in this region especially. He is the district's principal intergovernmental liaison for matters relating to emergency preparedness and response. And he serves as an advisor to the Coast Guard district and sector commanders. Among his responsibilities, he is the one we want to hear from tonight. He is the U.S. Coast Guard co-chair of the Russia-United States Joint Planning Group under the Russia-U.S. Joint Marine Contingency Plan for Pollution, Preparedness, and Response in the Bering and Chukchi Seas. And it doesn't get any better than that as far as finding out how this is going to roll and how the Coast Guard is hopefully planning as best they can with our neighbors in the Bering Strait region in the event that something goes untowards in the Bering Strait. With that, we're so glad to have you, Commander Everett. Thank you so much, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Gay, for that excellent introduction. Do appreciate it. That's quite a buildup. I appreciate those on the line this evening who skipped Harmonica Man in order to participate here this evening, but I might be able to make it up to you. I do have one of my guitars here, and maybe when we get done, I'll play a little tune, and we'll make up for the fact that you didn't get your harmonica dose tonight.
That sounds brilliant.
Oh, I'm not really that good. I just keep an electric guitar around for comfort. Okay, well, great. Thanks again, Gay, for the invitation to come and to speak on Strait Science. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. I'm the following up act from Admiral Moore, who was on the program back in September 2022. I spoke to him in the passageway today outside his office. He said to say, hi, y'all, and he sends his best. So on behalf of the Admiral, our district commander, thanks again for the invitation to the program. I wanted to add one more little item to that intro, in addition to some other responsibilities of mine as the district's incident management and preparedness advisor. Yes, I do have the opportunity to work with the Russian Federation and the Marine Rescue Service of the Russian Federation. I'm also the Coast Guard's co-chair of the Alaska Regional Response Team, which is, I think, as important to the presentation and understanding that background probably as any other part of my responsibility. So before I start with the slides, I will emphasize that what you're going to hear about tonight is the Coast Guard's plans to conduct this pollution response exercise in the Bering Strait. There are a number of pieces to this that you're going to hear me talk about. But a big portion of this, the full-scale exercise part of it, is going to be dependent upon the availability of our assets and our personnel. And because Coast Guard operations and our multi-mission nature of our service, it's always pulling us in multiple different directions. We're never going to let real live day-to-day operations get in, we're never going to let an exercise get in the way of our day-to-day real life operations out there on and above the water. So there's some possibility that all the good work that we're doing in planning for the exercise, it may even be on short notice that one of our assets or one of our players in the exercise gets pulled away for some other operational activity. I just want to put that up there out front, that this is a plan, not a promise, and things may change in the days ahead. Okay, so going on to slide 2 here, I'd just like to take a moment. Oh, and we do want to say if we could hold questions till the end, that would be helpful, because there's quite a bit of material to get through here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, try to get us out of here on time. So I'm going to say 3 main drivers behind the question of why. Why do this exercise? What's the push? Well, top of that list is the Russia-U.S. Joint Contingency Plan that we share. Working with the Russian Federation, the Marine Rescue Service, we have a work plan. We, up till last year when the invasion of Ukraine occurred, and we've had to cease our planning and activities with the Russian Federation. Up until that time, we were meeting every couple of years, and we have a 2-year joint work plan that we work from. We try to stay on track with drills and exercises, and we were on a multi-year plan, which would have come to fruition this summer with a full-scale joint Russia-U.S. Response plan in the Bering Strait. Unfortunately, because events on the world stage have unfolded the way that they've unfolded, we're not going to have our Russian partners involved in the exercise. What you'll hear me talk about this evening is U.S. domestic preparedness activities. Unfortunately, the Russians are not going to be playing. So, but that is a major driver. We want to continue to move ahead. We don't want to just stop that work. So we're going to continue to at least honor our side of that 2-year work plan agreement and move on out smartly. Number 2 would be Arctic Shield 23. We've been doing this Arctic Shield emphasis now for a number of years, and testing Coast Guard capability and projecting our missions forward in the theater up into the Arctic. Each year testing, new and different ways of getting Coast Guard presence seasonally into the far north. And so this is a part and parcel of that program for 2023. And lastly, but not least importantly at all, is that we have a federal on-scene coordinator. Captain Leanne Lusk is the sector Anchorage commander there in Anchorage. The Arctic is part of her area of responsibility for marine environmental response. And she and the district commander are, they're curious and concerned and responsible for response in the Bering Straits region and need to know the limits of our ability to respond. What can we do? What do we need to improve on? And those kinds of things. And so operational exercises, workshops, seminars, tabletop exercises, those kinds of things are all activities which help us understand, where our plans may fall short, where there are opportunities for improvement, where there are gaps between plans and capabilities that we may have. So there's the practical side of that. We understand that vessel traffic in the Bering is not only increasing, it's changing. It's becoming more complex. The risk profile there is constantly changing. And so our ability to get out on the water and to determine how to respond to the various threats there is a very important part of preparedness for the Coast Guard to be able to respond. So that's kind of the background. That's the why we are doing this exercise. So oftentimes when we think of the word exercise, the first thing we do think about is a full-scale exercise. It's the image that pops into our head, going out with helicopters, with boats, with planes, with ships, and doing things with personnel, testing equipment, that sort of thing. And that absolutely is a kind of exercise. We would call that a functional exercise. A full-scale exercise is when you're trying to achieve multiple objectives over a longer period of time. Generally, it's a bit more complex and requires more planning. But there are other things that are exercise activities as well: seminars, workshops, tabletop exercises, Drills are a form of exercise as well. And so this overall exercise in the Bering Strait actually has 6 different elements, 6 different pieces, and they don't all take place at the same time. I'm going to go through each one of these so that you'll understand what it is that we're trying to test, where it's going to be, who's going to be participating, and that sort of thing. If there's any one of these that you want to talk about further as I get done with the presentation, that's just great. But on the screen right there for you now are the 6 elements of the exercise. The 5th one of those is the full-scale exercise, and we'll get into the details of that as well. So first off is an ecological risk assessment. There have been risk assessments of the Bering Straits and of the Northwest Arctic Alaska region, part of the state. A number of those have been done over the years. I've got several of them in my own files. What we would like to do is to get out there and to do these based on IMO, International Maritime Organization Risk Assessment Model, which is kind of becoming the worldwide standard for doing risk assessments. And so we would like to use this Bering Strait area as our initial kickoff for an IMO-based risk assessment for the entire state. So this is kind of like tested at the small level and see if we can generalize this or extrapolate this approach to statewide model going through each of the area committees. So you'll be the inaugural region of the state to test this IMO risk assessment model. That'll happen as a community-based event. You can see there that we're coordinating with industry, technical agencies and organizations, local communities, tribes, et cetera. I've talked to the co-management organizations about this. It'll be there in Nome, 24th and 25th of April. Lieutenant Commander Matt Richards, the head of planning, emergency management, and force readiness at Sector Anchorage, will be getting a kind of an info push campaign going here very, very soon. So you'll be seeing more about this activity, inviting the community and other specialists to come in to talk about what are the resources at risk and going through this IMO risk assessment model. Aligned with that is element 2. So basically same dates, same place is a waste stream management workshop. Same basic kinds of invitees, folks that have some subject matter expertise, local area expertise, are going to be invited to come and participate in this. And you say, well, why do you worry about waste stream? If you think about the scenario for the spill that we're actually exercising, and I'll in a moment, I'll give you that actual scenario. A large spill is going to generate a lot of waste, and how to responsibly handle that waste so that you don't have other secondary contamination, so that it's not a hazard to personnel or to wildlife. And the amounts that we're talking about and the logistics involved in properly handling that kind of solid and semi-solid waste, it's an enormous task. And so we're going to need local input. We're going to need local expertise to determine what are the do's and don'ts, the best management practices for waste stream management. Now, we've got a strong partner in the Alaska Shadow Network that's going to be helping us out with that workshop, and they've got good equipment and great personnel, but it's going to take more than the Alaska Shadow Network to figure out how to properly do waste stream management in an incident like we're talking about here. So the third element is joint response team notification activation. Now, this is a little bit wonky. I apologize. This is kind of down in the weeds a little bit, but if you'll bear with me. So under the Russia-US, I'll just say joint contingency plan that we have, there are a couple of, I'm going to call them pre-established groups. One of those is the joint planning group. I'm the Coast Guard's co-chair for the joint planning group. I have a counterpart in Moscow who is pre-identified. Her name is Dr. Natalia Kutieva. We are the co-chairs of the Russia-US Joint Planning Group. So we do all of the planning required under this joint contingency plan and keeping all of that activity moving forward, keeping that big lumbering machine going forward, keeping us on track with our schedules. If there's an actual incident requiring a response, a separate team is stood up called the JRT, the Joint Response Team. Now, ideally, we'd be doing a joint response team activation with Russia, but as I said a moment ago, that's just not going to happen. So we are going to stand up the U.S. joint response team, and we'll have a call that essentially simulates what we would do in the actual event of a spill. So it sort of goes along the lines of, hey, there's been a spill. We need to support the federal on-scene coordinator in support of the response of the spill. There's a briefing that goes along with that. And then we take questions from any members of the joint response team. And those members, by the way, if you're wondering, well, who are the members of the joint response team? Essentially, they are the state of Alaska and the members of the Alaska Regional Response Team, and then anybody else in the federal government that we think that the federal on-scene coordinator needs to have their assistance or resources. That's going to happen virtually, so it'll be a kind of a hybrid call. It'll all be done like using Zoom or a tool like that on the 23rd of May. On the same day, we'll be doing an activation of the Alaska Regional Response Team incident-specific activation. Again, this is a little bit down in the weeds. It's a little bit wonky. So we have a standing Alaska RRT that exists every day. I mean, we have our regular meetings and we do planning and we maintain the regional contingency plan. We maintain our policy and our guidance documents. But in the event an actual spill occurs, there's another part of the Alaska RRT that can be stood up, and it's called the incident-specific RRT. If there is a spill which requires support to the federal on-scene coordinator and the state on-scene coordinator, the incident-specific RRT, if it's in the coastal zone, the Coast Guard co-chairs the incident-specific. If it's in the inland zone, the EPA co-chairs the incident-specific RRT. And because our scenario for this spill is in the coastal zone, it's out in the open water, will activate the incident-specific RRT, which is kind of a smaller incarnation of the full RRT. And again, we'll do a notification call, and we are going to step through the process. There is a well-defined, well-practiced process for consideration for use of aerial dispersant in this scenario. Now, we're not using dispersant in the exercise. This is all just kind of a paperwork drill to keep the members of the RRT aware of how the practice and how the protocol works. So that also will happen on the 23rd of May. And then there's the full-scale exercise. And so I think what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and advance, and then I'll come back to this slide because I want to show you this picture of the scenario a little bit. All right, if I've got, here we go. So I'll go back to those other slides in a moment, but describing the scenario for you, just our scenario is a collision of two vessels on the Russian side of the maritime boundary line. So it's essentially just northwest of Big Diomede Island there. In our scenario, we've written a scenario where a tanker collides with a cargo vessel. The tanker is going to burn for a couple of days. They'll be doing firefighting operations. And then about 2 days into that simulated accident, there will be a spill of 5,000 metric tons of medium crude oil, which in the scenario will hit the shore of Big Diomede, Little Diomede, and then continue over U.S. waters all the way over to the northern part of the Seward Peninsula. That's that polygon, that yellow square you see there, is essentially the exercise area where we're pretending oil is transiting through there, the trajectory of that large 36,000 barrel spill. So that's the scenario. It's a Russia-based scenario on the Russian side, which comes towards the U.S. And then all of our activities, those elements I showed you, are all around how do you respond to that spill. So how do you do waste stream management for a spill like that? What are the risks to subsistence, to commercial fisheries, and so forth? So that's our basic scenario for the spill itself. And it's a scenario we've been working with the Russians on since I think the first time we rehearsed that or practiced that was 2018. We came up with that scenario jointly as a reasonable probability of a spill occurring that would require a joint response. And so that's why we're using that as our basic scenario. And so our full-scale exercise, now back to the slides, element 5 here is when we're actually going to be moving personnel, aircraft, and vessels out into that operating area with that yellow box that I showed you. In the first week of June, all this activity will actually take place on the 7th of June. That's a Wednesday, during daylight hours. And the idea is to go out there and to practice as you would actually play, to practice as you would actually respond. So I'm going to show you some of the assets that we'll have involved in this. But first, mechanical recovery of oil is one of our objectives. When you do an exercise, you got to say, well, what are the objectives? What are we actually trying to accomplish here? So we want to demonstrate on-water mechanical oil spill recovery capabilities in the Bering Strait. And we'll be doing that using Coast Guard assets. That's the Coast Guard cutter Fur with a Navy piece of equipment on board. I'll show you that in a moment. The current buster system, which is deployed on the Coast Guard cutter Fur. We're going to do that in Nome the day before the exercise. We'll deploy it and actually put it out there on the water and see if this equipment can actually operate in that environment. Now, in a real world instance, this would normally come with a tug and a barge associated. We're not going to do that because it's just going to become, that's going to become very complex for us and a little costly. So we will probably involve Coast Guard C-130 aircraft. This is just really mostly transportation of personnel up to Nome. Here's the actual ocean-going buoy tender. So this is the platform. We'll be using Coast Guard cutter Fur, which is actually home ported in Cordova, but they work on aids to navigation all around the state of Alaska, as do all of our 225-foot ocean-going buoy tenders. This will be the one that's available to us for the exercise. She'll be down around in the area of the Kuskokwim Bay, working on some aids to navigation. For the exercise, we'll bring her up to Nome. We'll deploy that gear and put it out on the water, and she will take direction from another asset that I'm going to show you here in a moment. Okay, so aerial dispersant application. We have contacted Marine Spill Response Corporation. They are an OSRO, an oil spill removal organization. In fact, they're the largest OSRO in the country. They have currently 2, but soon will have 3 of these specially equipped Boeing jet aircraft. They're older model 737, so it's a 500, which is a shorter version. If you've flown on Alaska Airlines recently, you've probably flown on an 800 or a 900. Those are the larger ones, or a MAX, which are even newer. This is a smaller, shorter version. And this is specially equipped with external spray apparatus for use of aerial dispersant. Of course, we won't be spraying dispersant. We're only going to be using fresh water to simulate use of dispersant. With a single engine spotter aircraft, that's actually still under discussion as to whether we'll actually use that aircraft or not, but we want to plan to use it. And then, as I said earlier, all of this will be done under the aegis of the dispersant use plan for Alaska, which is in the regional contingency plan. So here's a shot of this aircraft right here. Now, this particular one is the first of the 3 that MSRC is putting together. This one is already operational. It's in Moses Lake, Washington, which is kind of, if you're familiar with Washington State, sort of mid-eastern central parts and kind of the high eastern desert side of the state of Washington. They're going to fly this up, and they're going to have it in Anchorage for a day. Then they'll have it up in Nome, and then we'll commence the exercise. And we'll have them out actually just spraying water on the water to test this capability for us. These are the interior tanks. You can see the kinds of modifications done to this aircraft. They can hold 4,100 gallons of dispersant. Of course, again, in this case, fresh water. That's actually consistent with what the law requires for a first run of dispersant, 4,125 gallons. Here's the spray nozzle array that is fitted to the aircraft. And on that right-hand side, you can see how that actually works and how that actually sprays. And this is a typical spotter aircraft that is used during aerial dispersant application. It's not going to be this exact aircraft. This is just kind of the typical sort of aircraft you'd expect to see. And the reason that you have a spotter aircraft during dispersant operations is to make sure the dispersant is going where it's supposed to go and doing what it's supposed to do. And they can also spot for wildlife, the presence of wildlife as well. So what are some of the other objectives of the full-scale exercise? Well, we want to use a major Coast Guard cutter, a big Coast Guard cutter on scene to direct our assets, the aircraft that I just told you about, and the Coast Guard cutter FIR with its current buster system to actually get out and get to the oil where it is. Again, no oil in the water. We're not putting anything in the water. This is all going to be simulated with computers as to where the trajectory of that oil spill is going to go. And so it's currently planned to be Coast Guard cutter Berthoff, which is a national security cutter. That's not the Berthoff on the left, but that's a cutter just like the Berthoff. So we call it a WMSL, a WMSL, but a national security cutter. The reason I have two pictures here in this briefing is because for a while it looked like we might be getting the Healy, which is our medium endurance icebreaker. But we've been told Healy is not coming. We'll get Berthoff. And this is our newest class of cutter. These are highly capable vessels, particularly in terms of communications and command and control platforms. So we basically have them out there on the water, directing traffic, helping with the oil spill response, and then it provides a communications platform back to Coast Guard sector Anchorage, which is where the unified command post is going to be. Captain Lusk and her team and other specialists in the environmental unit will be sort of determining how well the response is going in terms of recovery. So that'll be the command and control platform for us there out on the water. Now that vessel has on board a UAS, an uncrewed aerial system. This is an eye in the sky. We call it the Scan Eagle. It's a Boeing product. These are on all of our WMSLs. All of our national security cutters have this hardware on board. The goofy looking thing on the front of that looks kind of like a rectangular eye does have thermal and graphic imaging capabilities. And so we want to test that for oil spill response. It's not really been used very often for oil spill response. This little plane is often used for search and rescue, but we want to test and see, can it be used effectively for oil spill response, sending telemetry down to the Berthoff, communicating what it sees back to the command post and how well that happens. We know that there are a lot of communication challenges, both between aircraft and vessels, between vessels and between vessels and shore. And essentially, we want to see how good or how bad the communications are going to be between our command center in Anchorage and our command control node, the Berthoff, out in the Bering Strait. So that's what that's all about. We'll also be asking our friends from Pacific Strike Team down in California to come down and maybe do some specialized training on what are called SMART protocols for dispersant use. That's a kind of a NOAA term. And maybe we'll get some training from them. Maybe they'll have the opportunity to deploy some specialized equipment. Those conversations are still ongoing as to what the degree and the scope of Pacific Strike Team's involvement in the exercise will be. And then the last element of the exercise is something that we've just added in the last few weeks. We have a program in the Coast Guard called Spills of National Significance. You might remember a spill called the Deepwater Horizon spill about 13 years ago. That was a declared spill of national significance. And the reason we have this program is because the Coast Guard Commandant has the authority to declare any major spill, a spill of national significance. And the shorthand version of that is if the Commandant declares a spill of national significance, that frees up the whole of government, the whole of the federal government to be available to respond to that, as it did in the Deepwater Horizon response down in the Gulf of Mexico. Our thinking is that if we have a complicated spill up in the Arctic, including in the Bering Strait, that we should consider whether an incident like that should be deemed a spill of national significance, and a broader, more varied set of response capabilities from other federal agencies could be brought in. And so we're going to actually do kind of a conference call with our friends at Coast Guard headquarters to have a talk about a briefing for them about whether this scenario and our response to this scenario should be considered a spill of national significance. And so we're kind of developing the talking points for that. We didn't want to miss the opportunity to have that conversation and to give the practice needed to the people back in Coast Guard headquarters, because you just don't do this kind of stuff. These kinds of exercises with this degree of complexity aren't done very often. And we want to give them an opportunity to kind of share in our learnings and what we're doing. I showed this earlier. Here's the actual operational area. Our assets, so the FIR, the jet from MSRC, and the Berthoff will all be operating inside this box. We have already been talking with our federal natural resource trustee agencies, National Marine Fisheries Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, marine mammal management folks at Fish and Wildlife Service, the co-management organizations, tribal entities. We've shared this information with them about our activity out there for tribal and natural resource consultation purposes. And so far, we've gotten a green light, a thumbs up to be able to go ahead with our exercise with some mitigation measures in place, particularly for walrus, and to be on the lookout for eiders as well and other protected resources. Whales for sure. We got that from NIMS as well. So a long list of mitigation measures that we'll have in place for the exercise. This is just a typical shot of the what we call the trajectory model. The Alexandra that you see there on the graphic, that's the name of the tank vessel in our scenario that springs a leak and releases 5,000 metric tons of this medium crude oil. So we're saying it's typical, but it's probably not exact. So at hour like 55, this is sort of what you'd expect based on winds and weather and other conditions for the major portion of the oil slick to be. And I'm just showing you that because it's a good graphic that shows, where will we be putting our efforts out on the water to actually try to, I'll say, recover, in air quotes, the oil. And there's a whole series of these trajectories that we've had made up for use during our exercise. So bringing this right down to the end here. So these are some of the things, the check marks are things that we have already done, such as working with our interagency partners, putting together a strong design team. We had our mid-planning meeting for the exercise not too long ago, just last week on the 15th of March. I already mentioned consultation with the services and with the tribes. I have personally briefed the Alaska Eskimo Walrus Commission and the Alaska Whaling Commission. We have adjusted our exercise and our scenario based on some of their feedback. And it is our intent in briefings like the one I'm doing right now to continue to reach out to communities and make them aware of what we are doing. That outreach will continue as we move forward toward the exercise. And with that, Gay, I think that's about 30 minutes of me talking. And I think I'm ready for any questions that you have.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was really informative. I'm kind of absorbing all that in. I'm going to have to rewatch this. But right now, at this time, this is when I tell the Strait Science audience to give Commander Everett a little love in the chat box. It is never easy to be a public speaker, and that was a very interesting and engaging presentation of what's coming our way. Sounds really well thought out. And we did have a question first in the chat. People can raise your hands. Before I go anywhere, we do have a caller. So know that the caller, just jump in at any time, caller. I see you're on, and it is very difficult to be a caller on a Zoom call. So don't let me not give you a chance. And at any time, even if you need to step on us as we're underway with questions or answers, feel free to jump in, because that's the only way a caller gets heard, is just jumping in. With that, unmute at any time and ask your question. But we did have a question in the chat, and then I think after that, Tom Vaden had two comments. But the first was from Dean Stockwell. He was interested in knowing what kind of dispersants, and I gave it that it's just going to be fresh water, but he's actually interested in the actual dispersant that will be deployed, and how long are used, and then how long it takes to deploy this material.
Yeah, so correct. We're not using any dispersants in the exercise. We're only using fresh water. The current dispersant approved for use in Alaska is called Corexit 9500. That's in our dispersant use plan for Alaska. That is the product that is currently stockpiled in the state. As far as the sort of deployment time, there's a kind of a really, really long answer to this, and there's a kind of a shorter answer. I'll try to find something in between. One of the reasons that MSRC is putting millions of dollars into the building of these 3 jet aircraft is to be able to respond more quickly at farther distances from their main posts where those planes will be stationed. The one we're going to be asking them to let us use is in the Pacific Northwest. And that plane can actually make it all the way. It's almost hard to believe, but they can actually make it all the way to the Bering Strait and conduct one dispersant run within the required 12-hour period of time before they recover and refuel. And they'll need a new crew at that point. But more typically, they're going to fly up, they're going to land in Anchorage, they're going to refuel, they would take on board dispersant there. Again, this is all in the event of an actual spill where it was called upon to use that. And then they would head out from Anchorage. But their range for that aircraft as a jet aircraft actually does meet the dispersant use requirements response times. And so it's a good asset now to have the access to should an unfortunate day come when we have to call upon it. So I hope that answers that question.
Does that answer your question, Dean?
It sure did. Thank you.
All right. And then I'll read, Tom Vaden had 2 comments, and then we'll go to the questions. Some people have already got their hands up. Tom Vaden had 2 comments. One, I think there needs to be Tom, would you like to just read your own?
Right. I think there
Okay.
needs to be a Coast Guard sector in Nome. We're like, right on the edge of this, and I'm kind of pushing for this because you guys are pretty far away with Sector Juneau and Sector Anchorage. But we're building a port here, and as it warms up, we're going to need some people here, especially we're starting to expand our port. Number 2, I have a really big concern, and not a lot of people think about this, but the Chinese are going like, we're an Arctic nation. We're an Arctic nation. And, everybody goes like, they're not an Arctic nation, but they're building islands in the South China Sea. They have the technology. They can build an island up in the Arctic, and all of a sudden they're an Arctic nation. And that's going to cause some significant problems. Anyway, but I want to thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you. And I do have my contact information there on that last slide. You're welcome to contact me if you have any further questions. So this isn't the last opportunity to do that. But thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right. All right. Thank you, Tom Vaden. And we'll circle back around to the chat box in a minute. But Nicholas Parlato and Charlie Lean have been waiting patiently with their hands up. So go ahead, Nicholas. You're in front.
Thanks. Hi, Commander Everett. I do really appreciate this. I appreciate the transparency, and I appreciate all the information that you provided. I have several questions, but I don't want to take up a ton of time. But I do want to just note on the dispersant response that Corexit was also what was used in the Deepwater Horizon spill and by BP in their own private operations to clean it up. And it was declared to be, kind of an excessive use of it, and that it is considered to be a toxic material and has significant impacts on physiology, human physiology, as well as animal. And so I guess this kind of ties into the other questions, which is you've been in touch with the AEWC and the EWC. I'm wondering if this also conducting this ecological impact assessment, which I think you said that was going to be in late April, if kind of the results from that, especially if they're related to the potential toxicity of a dispersant or potential harms that the response might have on migrating whales, on walruses, on subsistence animals, if that would be sufficient time between April and June to actually make changes to, for example, the stockpile and choose, a less harmful dispersant in response to community concerns. Is that 2-month window enough, in your opinion, to actually implement community concerns into the plan?
Thanks for the question. There's a lot in there, so let me just try to unpack some of that. So starting with the ecological risk assessment, that event, that community-based event, which will be held in Nome, is a ecological risk assessment of the potential impacts of the spill itself, not necessarily of the response to the spill. So this IMO model takes a community sort of through, what are the threats present in your community? How is that threat profile changing over time? What are the resources that are at risk? And coming up with a risk versus consequence kind of matrix, so to better understand what the spill threats are to the community and how well prepared the community is to respond. So it doesn't get into assessment of the potential impact or value of response methods themselves. Okay, so the ecological risk assessment part of that we could set aside. The part of your question was about kind of the decision making that goes into the use of dispersants. I was telling Gay just prior to starting this session that we could do a whole separate Strait Science just on that topic. And I'd be happy to do that. That would be perfectly great. But it would take me about a half an hour to probably talk you through that whole process here. So what I'm going to do is to commend you to the actual source document itself. The dispersant use plan for Alaska is on the Alaska Regional Response Team's website at alaskarrt.org. If you just go in there and look under plans, you'll find the dispersant use plan itself, and there's all the checklists and all the considerations that go into that decision. We thankfully, gladly in this state, we haven't used dispersant, but we do practice the protocol, and it's important for us to practice the protocol. And the Alaska RRT does practice that protocol once a year, and we'll be doing it again in this exercise, just so that we can maintain fluency in the right questions to ask and understanding all of the equities involved and potential resources at risk and long-term consequences of that decision. I'll just add to that by saying we did one of those exercises back in 2013 or 14 when Captain Paul Mailer was the sector commander. He was the federal on-scene coordinator at Sector Anchorage, and we went through a similar scenario in a tabletop. The spill was in the Chukchi because back then we were talking about offshore drilling. And we talked about the possibility of the use of this tactic and decided it was not a good idea because of potential toxicity, specifically to whales and to walrus. And so the decision was made it would be less harmful to not use that and to allow the oil to become shorebound on a sterile beach somewhere where it would just be recovered later. So I guess I'm saying that to identify that, oftentimes we think about, there's this tactic, this potential response methods, they're going to use it. And the reality is that, first of all, we don't do it very often, but if it ever does have to be done, you got, people who are very knowledgeable and very concerned in that process. And we acknowledge that sometimes the decision is going to be, don't use it. It could be more harmful. I hope that helps answer some of those concerns.
It does. And if I could have a really quick follow-up, just noting that you all have done, USCG has been very, well received by communities in the Arctic and along the Arctic coast. I feel like Alaska communities really appreciate the work you all do. With the ecological impact assessment again, I just was wondering if, because Diomede in particular in this scenario is going to get hit especially hard, if you all are also supporting community members there to come to Nome to be providing their own input. And also because the area that you all indicated in where this exercise is going to occur would pretty much be after that spill has reached the shores of Diomede and potentially impacted the health of their nearshore area. Kind of like what does that mean, I guess? And this ties in a little bit with thinking about if this were to happen under the current geopolitical circumstances, would the Russian Coast Guard be reaching out to the US for assistance in that case?
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. So to the first one, are we providing any assistance for folks from Little Diomede to come to the mainland to participate? I'm not aware of any plans there to do so, but I will also tell you that the folks that are putting that together at Coast Guard Sector Anchorage have only just begun putting those details together. I will pass along to them that was brought up, and see if there's any way to at least make a virtual option for them to participate. Number two, you're absolutely right. The way the scenario that we put together, which was jointly put together by myself and my Russian planning counterpart, was very intentionally put together the way it was, because we wanted to see, I guess I'll say, you want a challenging scenario. You don't want something that's really easy, because if it's easy, then sort of why do it? You're not going to learn anything. So by placing the site of the collision where we did, relatively close to Big Diomede Island, we would almost assuredly oil those islands, which in the scenario we wanted to do, because it does make the response way more complex and the environmental impacts way harder to sort through. So yeah, that was an intentional decision. Now in the full-scale exercise that I'm talking about here this evening, we're not necessarily going to be getting into, well, how would you respond to that part of it? There may be a sideline discussion in the incident management team about that, and we'll capture that if it does happen. That may be another challenge for another day. And to the third part of your question, would the Russians be participating? Well, originally we had hoped this was designed as a joint exercise where the Russians would have their fleet on one side, we would have ours on another side, and we'd be talking back and forth. But unfortunately, that just isn't going to happen. But yeah, this was designed as a joint Russia-US exercise. And so maybe in our next exercise cycle, some of this geopolitical drama will be cleaned up and we'll be able to go back to that. I sure look forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you so
Thanks.
much for your questions, and thank you so much for that answer. So with that, Charlie Lean, you've been very patient. We've got Dean Stockwell and Seth Danielson. Go ahead, Charlie, lead off.
Okay, well, thank you. I too had questions about the dispersant use, but you answered them, and I'm glad that that's being well thought out. I had a comment in that in a CDC company I work for has done numerous beach cleanups, and stuff coming through the strait, particularly from the Russian side, seems to accumulate on a bight on St. Lawrence Island there between Gamble and Savunga on the North Shore. It just seems to be a magnet for rubbish, and I suspect it might be for oil as well. So in a real life scenario, I would anticipate a collision in that area to oil the beaches of northern St. Lawrence Island. And secondly, I had a question. I half expected to see Canada somehow involved in the drill, in the Canadian Coast Guard or some equivalent. And could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the question. So first off, we do have a separate binational agreement between US and Canada. It's just called CAN-US. It's the Joint Marine Contingency Plan between those two nations. There are 5 annexes to that plan, basically in the areas of our two nations where they come together. So you've got one for the New England area, the Great Lakes area, the Straits of Juan de Fuca and the Salish Sea down in the Pacific Northwest. And then there are 2 here in Alaska, both of which I'm responsible for, the Dixon Entrance and the Beaufort Sea, where the two nations come together. So two reasons why we don't have Canada. Well, I guess three reasons why we don't have Canada directly involved in this exercise. One is it just doesn't involve the Beaufort Sea. It doesn't come near any Canadian waters or any Canadian jurisdiction at all. Two is just kind of the logistics and difficulty of bringing the Canadians, into an exercise like this, just in terms of travel and the time commitment for them. And third is, I guess I would say, it's sort of customary when you have an agreement with one nation. The work that you do with that nation from a diplomatic standpoint is with that nation and not other nations, and especially not without their permission. And so, again, we initially crafted this as a binational exercise with Russia. And so we thought it might be a little bit of a bad form to bring Canadians into a Russia-US event. Let's put it that way. So now I will say that in future Arctic Shield activities, it's not impossible to imagine that there may be a Russia-US-Canada activity sometime in the future under the Arctic Shield program in the years ahead. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. I remember a barge with oil on it that got loose in the Arctic and drifted clear across.
I remember it well. I remember it well. I was just looking at the pictures from that a couple of days ago, the barge that took all winter to go across the top.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Dean Stockwell, go ahead.
First of all, Commander, thank you for this talk tonight. I can see you put a lot of effort into looking at different possibilities, and I understand you're just presenting this kind of springtime, early summer look at an exercise in the Straits. But I have two questions, and one is, this is a lot different than the Exxon Horizon in that you're only dealing with 50 meters of water. So a lot of oil potentially may reach the bottom. And I'm sure you have thought about mitigation of bottom oil deposits. The second question is, we have a difference in wintertime accidents and springtime, summertime accidents. So what are your thoughts basically on an accident that takes place during the winter where there's ice fields all over and, dispersants aren't going to work for you? And I know you've thought about all this, and I'm just kind of putting this out to you.
Yeah, well, you're right. Ice of a certain concentration is contraindicated for use of dispersants, and I'm fairly familiar with a lot of the studies that have been done by Syntef and others trying to use dispersants in ice-clogged waters, and it's just not effective. But that said, when we start talking about exercises in summer scenarios versus winter scenarios, ice-free versus ice-choked waters, I guess the simple answer is you got to start somewhere. And we're starting with a summertime scenario because vessel traffic tends to be greater in the summer months and in the shoulder seasons than in the winter. And so when it comes to exercise planning and risk assessment and mitigation, you kind of, you go where the risk is. It's not saying that there's no risk in the winter. There certainly is. And it's actually, a more complicated spill response. But for us, we're going to call this kind of a crawl, walk, run proposition, particularly in a joint environment where we're trying to work with the Russians. It's taken us 6 years just to get to this point of an actual functional or full-scale exercise. Everything we've done with them up until now has been in a conference room or on a, in a safe environment where you're just really talking in the abstract. So it would be fascinating to look at those kinds of issues, the complexities around recovering heavy oil in ice in an environment that is already so logistically challenged. That's I think I'll start another second career just looking at that particular problem. It's a great question, and yes, we have thought about it, but we got to start somewhere.
Yeah, fair enough. I really appreciate that honest answer. How about a difference in response times, winter versus spring? Are you talking a week, I mean, I know you looked at it, so I mean, I'm just getting an estimate.
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on what response. I mean, the response that we've developed for this scenario is based on, for example, the Coast Guard cutter Fur being already being in routine operations down in the Kuskokwim Bay area down by Bethel. And so we know that if we had the scenario, it's going to take them 2 days to get to Nome. We already know that. That's just a time, distance, and speed equation. But if they're in Cordova, or if you have to call a cutter out of Dutch Harbor or someplace like that, it's going to be even longer. So, you know, the Coast Guard's available assets are not nearby. That's pretty obvious just looking at a chart. Commercial assets, however, in the form of Alaska Shadow, they have assets much, much closer. Our goal in this exercise was to look primarily at Coast Guard assets and our ability to respond, because that will help us shape what we need to do as an organization in the future to prepare better for our capabilities. So it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer, because it has one of those sort of it depends kind of built into it, if you know what I mean.
Yep. No, thanks. Really appreciate your effort. Great talk.
You bet. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dean. And why don't we have Seth go next, and we'll circle back to the chat box. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So I'm a physical oceanographer, and so I'd like to talk about currents just for a moment. You know, in the summertime, as I'm sure you're aware, the currents just boom northward through Bering Strait, and in the wintertime, they're much more likely to reverse and carry things south. So a spill in the western side of the strait in the summer might just shoot northward at 20 or 40 kilometers a day or something, and really not be too much of an issue for the people on Little Diomede Island, which would be kind of nice. But our team here at UAF operates a couple high frequency radar systems, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have one of them installed along the beach outside of Wales, and one of them in Shishmaref. We hope to have these things operating before your exercise this spring. You know, we need to make a couple of visits out to these sites here before they get back online again. I guess my question to you is, how important is it to you and your exercise to have real-time currents in the spill vicinity being measured?
Yeah, very good. Excellent points. Let me start with where you ended. Yes, we are working with Shayna Wisdom and Molly McCammon from AUS. They have their Bering Strait response tool. We have them in the design team already. We've been working with them for months to bring that tool and those high frequency sites that you mentioned, which are feeders to that tool, into the command post in Anchorage. So those are elements I didn't really get into, but in that incident management team in Sector Anchorage, we'll have access to IRMA, access to AU's tools, all for situational awareness, all for environmental evaluation. So yeah, those pieces will be included. As far as real time, if we can get real time data for, during the exercise to compare to the stuff that we've put together in the planning phase of the exercise, oh, that's golden. That's awesome. So we'll be working through with Shayna Wisdom, to get access to that data.
Right, Shayna is our funder, so that's great to hear. And I don't know if the Coast Guard will have any assets like helicopters deployed in Nome during this thing, but if you have the ability to run us out to them, if they're not operating during the exercise, or even in terms of just getting them up and running for the spring ahead of time, maybe we can converse offline or something and figure out if that would be a possibility.
Yeah, currently, Seth, there are no plans to have helicopters available for the exercise. As I'm sure you can imagine, the helicopter time for us is just precious. And this time of year, it's important to keep them available for search and rescue, and especially in the summertime. Now, there may be deployed helicopters in Kotzebue. Don't quote me on that, Ben. I know we do summer deployments there in Kotzebue. That's not my program, and so I'm not directly involved in that one. But Yeah, this kind of technology is enormously helpful to us. I wanted to just jump back to the trajectories for that time of year and that northern carriage based on those currents. You're absolutely right. We've looked at that a number of times. They seem even stronger for whatever reason on the western side of the Bering than on the eastern. But our trajectory, which NOAA put together for us, does account for those very strong currents that go north. So that's all excellent information. So thanks for kind of validating where we are.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for what you're doing. This should be an interesting exercise.
Thanks.
Thank you, Seth. All right, so in the chat, there's a couple comments. I think that Kyle Dillaplane's question got answered, and I want to give a shout out to Kimberly Marr because she put in a lot of good websites that Commander Everett was recommending.
Thanks,
So
Kimberly.
Thank you for dropping those in the chat. There is a question: is Alaska Command participating in any of these events?
No, this is basically Coast Guard. I don't want to say Coast Guard only because it isn't Coast Guard only, but no. And we have done some exercises in the past with Department of Defense. They have done mass rescue operation exercises with us in the past few years. They have actually used their assets to support other exercises, sort of indirectly, that we have done, but. No, right now there's no plans to involve DoD in this exercise. Well, I mean, let me qualify that. Other than the current buster system, which is owned by Navy Soup Salve, so I guess technically yes, because Navy is part of the Department of Defense.
All right, and I also, looking at the chat, I think Kyle, hopefully your question got answered when Dean was asking about sea ice in the area and the response for that. Tom Vaden says that's why we need a Coast Guard sector gnome. And Michael Katiba, Commander Katiba, retired U.S. Navy, asked, maybe this is for Seth, have you reached out to Pathfinder helicopters? They fly this area, meaning they do the Nome to Diomede and other charter work, but they do a Nome to Diomede passenger and mail service run twice a week. And that is correct for aviation. No one knows the area better nowadays from Nome to Diomede and in between over to Wales. Oh, thanks, Seth. I see you responded, but I don't know, Commander Everett, if you have reached out to me, it's really interesting that, and I think it's wonderful you've reached the co-management groups, which doesn't mean comprehensive coverage for the Bering Strait region. Those may have some villages or communities, but not comprehensive representation, like the Alaska Bowhead Whaling Commission. That only has 4 of our 20 tribes involved, and Eskimo Walrus Commission may not have all of our 20 tribes involved. And so I'm looking forward to, are you guys going to be doing more regional comms on a regional scale?
We're not done with outreach yet.
Okay.
Yet. One of the great
I'm
really
really glad you're here tonight. This is.
Oh, you were right. I mean, this is a two-way road, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so one of the nice things about doing these sorts of presentations is that I get to pick up nice little nuggets along the way that I can take back and say, oh, we probably should be talking to, these people or this group or this company. I can't promise I'll get to every single one of them because we have a limited staff in terms of planning the exercise. But when there's those golden little nuggets that look good to pick up and carry on, I definitely will. Pathfinder is one of those that I just wasn't familiar with.
Yeah, they're a great asset here and are truly Bering Strait specific. And many of the pilots are ex-military, or retired military, so they speak your language.
Yeah. No, real good. I do appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. Like I said, I enjoy getting these helpful nuggets to go back and to talk with my other planners and see if we can follow up on some of these. It'll all just make for a better exercise.
Now, here's my other question, if I can ask a question, and that is, so it matters all the time when you live in the Bering Strait region about Chukotka. And I say that because I know you have to look at the Russian Federation at the Coast Guard level, government to government, federal to federal. For us, we live in a neighborhood with a line down the middle that's strict, but it's the same body of water. It's the same, in some cases, the same language, the same blood, the same you know, the same foods, that kind of thing. So we are a neighborhood. It's a bit disjointed at the moment, but there we are. We're kind of used to it that way. I did going back to your joint planning group, that kind of my ear went up. On the 23rd of May, you're gonna get in touch with your Gutiava, the Russian.
Well, no.
Counterpart?
The joint response team will be US only. And we're
So-
not involving any of the Russians in any of these activities.
But hopefully, and this is my question, when you're sending a 730, I don't know what the altitude is when that thing makes a pass under 1,000 feet.
When it's actually deploying, well, again, in this case, it's just fresh water. It's at
Fresh water,
it's at 200 feet.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll get everyone's attention. So know that we have the, you know about the Air Force Line site, I forget what it's called, but the Air Force Tin City. Right.
Well, I've never been there, but I'm familiar with what the Dew Line is, and I've heard of Tin City.
Okay, so they're active. And then we have on the north shore of Big Diomede, we have a base. And when you start this drill and you've got a cutter, a buoy tender, and a 737 flying at 200 feet, I did not know that. That's kind of exciting. Then will the Russians be aware of your exercise and where it's being located? I sure hope so, because these kind of things matter for our neighborhood, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a great point. Something I'll take back to our intel people and pass to them. Hopefully they've got their mechanisms and people points of contact that they talk to.
I sure hope so. And I know that the District 17 has the red phone, and we are really grateful for U.S. Coast Guard District 17 that they still have the ability to pass messages regarding things that are going on in the strait that are life and death and also unusual. And I would say having these kind of activities, I would sleep better knowing that the Russians know why we're doing these things. And I think the people of Chukotka would probably appreciate that, and they are our neighbors. So
yeah, no, that's good, Gay. I appreciate that. Thanks.
yeah. We really appreciate your time. I mean, you can see that to me, you have to argue that this is a spill of national significance, a SANS. So if you ever need help in describing why it is a SANS, please get in touch with me or anyone else in the Bering Strait region, and they will list off a whole host of things that we have here that are at the national level that may be, it doesn't have to be big, but the importance of this region for lots of different aspects that you may not think of. We can nail your reasons why this would be considered a spill.
Yeah, no, that's in fact, I was just on the phone with our headquarters. What is today? Wednesday. So it was Monday. We had a call about that activity, and in law, there is a list of 6 things that you have to consider to make a determination of a spill of national significance. And I ticked off 3 of the 6 right off the top of my head. So I said, if this occurred, this would be a spill of national significance.
It will be. Your response, what you're drilling for is, I have no doubt. If you need the right wording or the right perspective, please contact us all in the Bering Strait region. We will have it for you. With that, you have a lot of kudos and thank yous in the chat, and I appreciate that. Strait Science is always a terrific audience. And no further questions. You can get a clap from Jim Dory. That's nice. Thanks, Jim. With that, I guess we'll close it up. I'm going to say for tomorrow, because this is a Strait Science doubleheader this week. Tomorrow at 6:30, we've got Rick Toman in town. And we also have the National Weather Service, some people from the National Weather Service Forecast Office in town as well. They didn't come to see just Rick, but they'll probably attend. I know they've been listening to Commander Everett tonight, so we're grateful. National Weather Service is in town. And tomorrow night at 6:30, if you're online and want to see Rick Toman, up at the UAF Strait Science website, you can get the link for that. I highly recommend it. He's going to recap our winter weather and what spring and summer are going to bring us regarding the sea ice, which we're all kind of interested in, especially right now, as that we just came out of a storm from the southeast and we're going into another one out of the south. What's happening with the ice, as well as what may lie ahead for this summer. So I know, Commander Everett, you may be interested in that for tomorrow as well. And come on down to Northwest Campus in the main building if you're in Nome, at the Nagazaruk Conference Room, the main building right there just east of the Aurora Hotel. And with that, Commander Everett and maybe Lieutenant Commander McCann, if he's still on, if you guys can just hang for a second after, if that's okay. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.